Hello, random people of the internet. Today, we're going to talk about the founding of Rome. We will answer such age-old questions such as, what did the Trojans have to do with Rome? Why did the god Mars engage in an epic rap battle? And why did Romulus kill his brother Remus? Our story begins with the fall of the city of Troy, and with the escape of a Trojan by the name of Aeneas. Why was Troy on fire? Well, the cause of Troy's destruction, like in most Greek myths, has its origins in someone being horny, and for once, it wasn't Zeus. Maybe we can talk about the Iliad another day, but we just need the cliff notes for now. Troy is sacked by the Greeks and burnt to a crisp, while one dude named Aeneas manages to escape with his family, minus his wife. He then spends several years leading a bunch of other survivors on a bunch of wild adventures, all across the Mediterranean, which you can read about in the Aeneid. Eventually, he would land in central Italy, which he decides is a pretty good place for his Trojans to settle down. The native Latin people, much like my grandfather, did not like immigrants, and so it got very confrontational between the two groups. Luckily, things calmed down because Lavinia, daughter of the Latin king, would marry Aeneas. After getting a new wife and a green card, Aeneas would go on to build a city for his people, named Lavinium, after his wife. Stupid simp. Both the Latins and the Trojans would live in harmony, till a certain neighboring prince named Turnus of the Rudii attacked. He had previously been betrothed to Lavinia, and he didn't appreciate this random Trojan guy showing up and stealing his girl. There was a big battle between the Rudii and the Trojans and their Latin allies, and while the latter alliance won, Aeneas' father-in-law, the king of the Latins, was killed in the fighting. Aeneas would inherit the leadership of the Latins, and thus the Trojans and the Latins would become one people. Unfortunately for Aeneas, an Etruscan king named Mezentius would also decide to fight him. While Aeneas would prove victorious, he would die in the fighting. Now don't feel too bad for him, as according to the Roman lore guy named Livy, he would ascend to godhood and become the local deity of the river Numicus. Of course, this is all just pagan nonsense, and Aeneas is surely burning in hell for engaging in premarital handholding with Queen Dido of Carthage, but that's between Aeneas and Jesus. Following Aeneas' death, his son Ascanius became king, and he would eventually decide to build his own city. So, he founded a settlement in the nearby Alban Hills, named Alba Longa, which is believed to have existed where the modern town of Castel Gandolfo now sits, which, as the name hints, is also famous for being the summer home of the wizard Gandalf. Ascanius, besides building a city, did nothing else of note, and promptly died. He would be followed by a long list of descendants who would reign as kings of Alba Longa. We will pick up our prologue about 10 generations later, with King Praca, who should have hired a doctor, because he died. But, before he did, he would have 2 sons, so that's good. The eldest of Praca's sons was named Numitor, and he was supposed to succeed his father as king. Unfortunately for him, his younger brother Emilius did not really like that, so he overthrew Numitor in a coup. To ensure none of his brother's sons would challenge him, Emilius adopted the Crusader Kings II strategy and had all of his nephews killed, ensuring no rival claimants to the throne. As a side note, you may wonder why Emilius is represented by Richard III of England. Well, I couldn't find any good images of Emilius, and I decided to originally use Scar from The Lion King, since he was also an evil tyrant who seized power from his brother. I remember the Mouse Mafia is really ruthless about copyright, and so I had to scrap the idea. So I chose Richard, also an evil uncle that gained kingship through killing his nephews. Now, Numitor did also have a daughter named Rhea Silvia, who being young, could eventually marry and have sons of her own, who could thus challenge Emilius for the throne. Emilius wanted to avoid this, and thus forced Rhea to become a Vestal Virgin, a priestess of the goddess Vesta. As the name implies, Vestal Virgins were sworn to celibacy, which of course ensured that Rhea would have no sons. Unfortunately for Rhea, she would not remain celibate for long. You see, the god of wars, Mars, thought her a 10 out of 10, so he chased her into a cave, and then engaged in what a dyslexic person might call a rap battle. As a result of Mars' diss track, Rhea became pregnant, which is not a very good look for a Vestal Virgin. She would eventually give birth, and would have not only just 1, but 2 sons, twins. King Emilius, as you can imagine, was not too happy about this development. He thought about killing his niece and her children, but decided against it. You see, killing the son of a god was not yet acceptable to the Italians, and would not be so for another 800 years. So, Emilius decided that he would imprison his niece Rhea, and not harm her sons. Directly. Instead, he ordered a servant to take the 2 boys out into the wilderness, and leave them exposed to predators. Emilius, the absolute genius he was, reasoned that if it was nature that killed the twins, he would technically not be responsible, and therefore Mars and the gods wouldn't hold their deaths against him. This 1000 IQ plan was however ruined by a servant tasked to carry it out. You see, this servant had something called a conscience. Now, the servant had watched the masterpiece of animation that is The Prince of Egypt, so He put the two boys in a basket, which he set in the Tiber River, and he wished them safe luck and safe travels on their cruise. Obviously, it should be pointed out that these two twins, being the protagonists of our story, had plot armor protecting them, and as such, the god of the Tiber River, the second watery deity to appear thus far, who was creatively named Tiberinus, caused the waters to be calm and for the current to bring up their basket near the river bank. And wouldn't you know it, the basket was chanced upon by a wild pupper. Instead of eating the two tasty snacks, the kind she-wolf took the twins back to her cave, where she sheltered and nursed them. The image of the she-wolf nursing the two brothers has been depicted over the centuries in many famous works of art, most of which are beautiful. A few are a little demonic. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus happened upon the she-wolf and her cubs. Faustulus took the two kids away from the fairy milk machine and brought them home to his wife. Now, naturally, in the vein of most stories, the couple decided to adopt the two twins and raise them as their own. Thankfully, the first thing they did was name them, and as such, I can use their names, Romulus and Remus, instead of just saying twins or brothers every half second. Eventually, both brothers would grow up and reach manhood. You know, that time when all of life's problems begin. Like taxes. And women. Now, they also had to contend with other shepherds. Romulus and Remus would one day find themselves thrown down against some of these shepherds. The ancient historians differ on what started the fight. It could have been many things. Maybe Remus insulted the quality of the other guy's sheep. I don't know, don't care. But we do know Romulus would escape, while Remus would be captured and brought back to the shepherd's hometown, which of course happened to be Alba Longa. You see, Romulus eventually got bored of being the only child at home, and so decided to go rescue his brother. So he gathered up some friends and started heading towards Alba Longa. But on the way, he met this guy named Numitor, and Romulus learned that he was his grandson. How they made that connection? I don't know. There are half a dozen variations of this story, and it's all very confusing. But Romulus, he was smart, and so he figured it out, and that's all we need to know to move the plot forward. The grandfather and grandson duo joined forces and led an attack on Amulius and his palace, killing the evil king and freeing our boy Remus from prison. Both brothers, now reunited, would be offered the kingship of Alba Longa, but they refused and would reinstate their grandfather as king. R&R did not want to rule Alba Longa, but they did want to play city builder. Of course, city skylines had not yet been released, so the two brothers set out to build their own, in real life. They came to the hills overlooking the Tiber River. There they would build a city, a great city, one that would become the heart of one of history's greatest empires. There was just one teensy-eensy little issue. Location. Romulus wanted to build their city on the Palatine Hill. Palatine Hill, sorry. Star Wars is playing in the background. Romulus, he wanted to build on the non-force-sensitive Palatine Hill, while Remus wanted to build their city on the Aventine Hill. Now, to solve this standstill, the brothers consulted the heavens. They would resort to the age-old practice of augury. What is augury, you may ask? Well, you know how your grandma likes to watch birds in her backyard bird feeder for fun, since you are a horrible grandchild and never visit her? Well, back in ancient times, they liked to birdwatch as well. It was done to receive an answer from the gods. So, the brothers asked the gods for a sign to prove which hill had divine favor. Now you see Remus, he would see 6 birds fly around his hill. Meanwhile, the force was strong with the Palatine, as Romulus would see 12 government drones circle his. Romulus, who has always got good grades in math class, pointed out to Remus that 12 is greater than 6. So, he began to build the walls of a city on the Palatine. Remus, being a little frustrated, mocked his brother's construction by leaping over the unfinished walls. This angered Romulus, who did what all siblings have at one point thought or considered doing. That is, of course, murder. I, for one, am grateful that Romulus killed Remus, not the other way around, because then instead of the Roman Empire, you would have had the Rheman Empire, which does not feel or sound right. Anyway, the city of Rome needed citizens. To encourage immigration, Romulus declared his city a free haven for anyone who was on the run from the law. As a result, Rome was populated by all kinds of criminals. While this secured citizens for the short term, the long term was in doubt. There was a huge gender imbalance, far too many men and very few women. Unless the Romans could find wives from outside the city, it would fail. So, the Romans went to neighboring towns and villages hoping to find some wives. But for some reason, the local women were not interested in marrying a bunch of thieves, rapists, and murderers, which, if you ask me, is an unrealistic dating standard. To ensure his city lasted more than one generation, Romulus engaged what many would consider kidnapping, but what I will call a surprise mass date. Romulus invited the people of the neighboring towns to come to Rome for the festival of Neptune. Many people came, including the Sabines, with their many unmarried daughters. During the festival, Romulus gave a signal to his men, who each grabbed and abducted a Sabine woman. Maybe it's Sabine, I don't know, I don't care. It's unknown how many women were abducted, but the historian Livy says it was undoubtedly more than 30, which of course means Romulus still did not beat P. Diddy. As one may guess, the Sabine women being gone, the men weren't too happy that their daughters and sisters had just been Epsteined, and so they formed an army which marched on Rome. The Romans and the Sabines would fight in the Battle of Lacus Curtis. It was a bloody battle, and it raged on for many hours as many, on both sides, were killed and oofed. The fighting stopped, however, when the Sabine women ran onto the battlefield and put themselves between the two armies. They didn't like their fathers killing their husbands, or their husbands killing their fathers. Both sides agreed with that logic, and so they stopped killing each other. A bunch of Sabines would have actually moved in with the Romans into Rome, and so their king, Tatius, would rule alongside Romulus over the growing city. Or he did, at least until he was killed. And thus, after that, Romulus was the sole king of Rome, which was, as I said, growing very quickly in both population and might. He would expand his kingdom beyond the walls of Rome, conquering the city of Fidense. He'd also try to conquer the city of Veii, but Romulus did not have his brother's jumping abilities, and thus was unable to find a way over the walls of the city, and so he had to go home. Altogether, Romulus would rule as king of Rome for 37 years. But all good things must come to an end. How his time on Earth ended is contested. Some say that during a really violent storm, he disappeared in a whirlwind, but most ancient sources say that he was raised to the heavens by his father Mars. What is known is that however his life ended, during his time on Earth, he laid the literal foundations of Rome, the city which bore his name, and would go on to conquer the entire known world, becoming the bedrock of our modern Western civilization. Now, of course, one might say this is all mythological, and nothing I talked about today really happened. And of course, that viewer would be right. However, it's a very cool story. I'm happy to have wasted a weekend making this video. Please subscribe and hit the like button, or I will break into your house this next Tuesday.